We so they moved in. It was Ted and his wife and a young boy, and they stayed with us. I guess Ted worked almost 2 months, and he made several saddles in them 2 months. Ted was used to building production line saddles. He also knew how to make custom saddles, but for the last several years he had been doing production line saddles. He worked for Billy Cook for several years and doing that kind of work. So it was hard to get. Well, it wasn't hard. I just had to work with him a little bit to get him to do it a little different. But he put us, stocked us up on some saddles, and then they decided to go on. I guess went back to Texas. I'm not real sure. Yeah, I know they did. Yeah, we kept in touch with them for several years, and Ted finally. I'm not sure whether it was by his choice or just didn't have the work, but he went to work for the sheriff's department as an interpreter in the county just outside of Dallas. And actually, he went to work at first just volunteer work when they needed an interpreter. And I don't know, we was over there one time and he was getting ready to go to work and he was strapping on a gun. I said, "What happened? Did you get a promotion?" He said, "Yeah. They told me I was going to have to start carrying a gun, and to carry a gun they'd have to pay me." So he, I don't think wasn't working full time for the sheriff's department, but it did work into a full time, and so his saddle work slowed down a lot. And that's about that time is when we lost contact with him, and I don't know what he's doing now, but he was a good saddle maker, and he helped us out when we needed it. I was somewhat of an oddity in the Columbus and Central Ohio area. There weren't any saddle makers in this area, even in the state, and I don't think within 4, 5, 6 states around us. There might have been somebody that just a hobbyist that would make one occasionally, but somebody that, especially somebody doing it full time, there wasn't any. So I was a little bit of an odd bird, and I attracted attention in the media, and back then I was on TV a couple of different times. I've had write-ups in the Columbus paper. Just 2 or 3 years ago, 3 years ago now I guess it is, we decided to put up a workbench at the Congress, and I worked on some saddles there during the Congress, and a lady come by and with a photographer, and she wanted to know if she could take some pictures and possibly write up a story, and I said sure. And so she wrote up a story, and they had a picture of me and had a story in the paper. And now there are I know of 5, 6 people in Indiana, Ohio, and West Virginia that makes a saddle occasionally, but they call themselves saddle makers, and I wouldn't question that. I'm not real sure. They don't make very many for sure. And then there's a couple, 2 in Indiana and 1 in Pennsylvania, that are good saddle makers and do it full time. While I was at Rods, most of the saddles that I made at that time were silver show saddles. At that time it was getting close to the point of the old time parade silver saddles, but not quite that far yet. But we did use a lot of silver on them. A lot of silver on the headstalls, breast collars, belts. I made a belt for a young lady, and she lived in New York, Long Island, New York. She had about a 30-inch waist, and she picked out 3 large, I guess they were breast collar plates, or for something for that. They were about, I don't know, 6, 7 inches long, and I shaped them to the contour of her waist. And when we got it finished, she found out that she had to put the belt on in the loops in her pants before she put her pants on, because it just wouldn't straighten out enough for them to run them through the loops after she had the pants on. So it was almost solid silver all the way around. Plates come close to meeting, and we bought a lot of our silver from Boat. We would design a lot of our silver and send it to Boat and let them make it. When I was at the cowboy shop in Rushville, Indiana, with Ron Berkey, he come up one day and said, we were making quite a few silver saddles then, show saddles, and in fact that's just about all we made. And at that time, about all we put on the cantle was a nameplate and maybe some conchos around it. So he come up with the idea of shaping a piece of silver to cover the whole cantle of the Cheyenne roll. And so I started the saddle, got it ready to shape, the Cheyenne roll was shaped, and so I cut a pattern, paper pattern, and sent it to Boat, and they made what we sent them. And some things happened along about that line that time, and we weren't able to, when Chet had them ready, well, we just couldn't pay for them. And I don't remember now what happened, but anyway, um, I guess the cowboy shop was having a little bit of financial problems, and so anyway, um, we wasn't able to pay for them, and everything coming to the cowboy shop uh, was we had to pay for it before we could get it. There was no open account or anything. So the way it got back to me, the way what I was told was that Chet held on to them for I don't know how long, and finally he had a chance to sell them and get his money out of them, and so he did. Um, another saddle maker bought them and used them, and so that's how the uh, the solid piece of silver across the Cheyenne Road. That's as far as I know. That I made the first one, and it kind of spread from there. Now there's all kinds of versions. The version I like the best is the three-piece. It's the centerpiece is about twice as long as a regular nameplate, and then the piece on each end, and that way it will fit. You'll come near fitting more styles of Cheyenne roll, and nearly every saddle maker makes a different style, and from one saddle to the next it'll change a little bit if you don't have something to go by like a piece of silver that you've got to shape it to. While I was at Rod's, at the Congress one year, we had a pretty nice saddle. I don't recall. It had some silver on it. It wasn't particularly a show saddle. It was, I think, a reining saddle, a reining type saddle that had some silver on it. And this fella come up and he wanted it, and normally we didn't take checks down at the fairgrounds, and they usually had to go up to the store and pay if they had a check or credit card. But Rod knowed this man, and we called him, and he said, well, go ahead and take his check, it'll be good. So we did. We took his check, and he took the saddle, and I don't know, less than 2 weeks, a little over a week later, we got the check back. And Rod called him, and he said, no, the man called. That's what it was. The man called and talked to Rod. And what had happened while he was at the Congress, IRS come in and froze everything he had. His bank account, all of his finances, they froze it. And so he said, I'm just letting you know that check won't go through. He said, it will be ironed out shortly. He said, I want the saddle, and if you can just hang with me, you'll get your money. So Rod told him, said, that's okay, we'll handle it that way. So things rocked on, and I don't know, maybe 3-4 weeks later, Rod called him, and he said, it's not looking good. And he said, I'll let you know something in a week, one way or the other. He said, I'll get the saddle back to you, or I'll have the money for you. Well, about a week later, the man called, talked to Rod, and he said, I've got a horse that they don't know anything about. And said, tell Dan Dan Evans, who he was talking about, says, tell Dan what Herbert said. He gave me the bloodlines, and he said, tell Dan and see what he thinks about her. Well, Rod turned around and called Dan and talked to him, and Dan said, gosh, yeah, says, take her. What he was offering to do is give us the mare for the check. And so Dan got excited. He said, sure, take her. Said, we can make money on that. Well, come find out the mare was in foal. And they come to me and said, the way we see it, you own a third interest in this mare. Said, you can keep on owning a third interest in her, or we will buy you out. Well, I thought about it, and I decided that I really needed the money and not a horse to feed. So they give me the money, and they was real pleased. The mare was doing good. The foals, she was pregnant, and everything looked good. And one day, Rod come back to where I was at the shop, and he said, well, you come out good on that horse. I said, how's that? He said, Dan found her in the pasture dead this morning. So I was the only one that come out doing any good on that deal. But if something hadn't happened, well, they would have been done real good too. They'd had the mare and the colt. And the colt was a real good breeding.